Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Sankoff, the TriDoc, and I'm here to talk to you today about bicycle maintenance, specifically as it pertains to potentially eking out a couple more watts and a little more speed on your regular training rides as well as during your races. Now, most people are familiar with the idea of doing all kinds of different things that can cost a lot of money, like getting new race wheels, getting a new frame that's a little more aero, an aero helmet, those kinds of things. And we know from wind tunnel studies that those things do actually translate into free speed. But one of the things that often gets neglected is the fact that the drivetrain of your bike can be a source for a lot of lost watts. A dirty, grimy chain, a dirty, old cassette can contribute to friction points that loses the translation between the power you're putting into the pedals and the power that ends up getting transmitted to the wheels to make you go faster. So keeping your drivetrain clean, free of dirt, and frequently oiled up and lubed is the best way to make sure that the drivetrain is a minimal source of friction. But there are some other products that have come onto the market in the last probably 10 to 15 years that look at replacing oil altogether, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. The fastest and sleekest aero frame coupled with the fastest and sleekest aero wheels will get you so much, but keeping that drivetrain clean is really important. You can see I've got the bike on the stand here because what I'm preparing to do is actually coat my chain. And this is what a lot of people have started to do with some of these newer products. The one that I use is molten speed wax, but there are several others out there that all accomplish pretty much the same thing. The idea here is simply to coat your drivetrain with something that will keep the friction points as low as possible for as long as possible, and better yet, unlike oil, not collect all the dirt and grime that can so frequently gum up a drivetrain and keep you from being as frictionless as possible. Now, molten speed wax is one of the products out there. There are several others, and I have no affiliation with molten speed wax or any of these products, so I don't want to get into naming all of them, but because I'm using speed wax today, that's the one I'm going to show you how what's involved with taking your chain and your cassette from being a regular oil-based drive to one that includes a coating such as speed wax. The most important part of applying any kind of coating to a chain and to a cassette is to have the chain and cassette really, really clean before you do anything to it. And so there are various means of washing the chain and washing the cassette. I have, however, invested in this small ultrasonic cleaner, and I have found that it does the job particularly well. It's a little bit of an annoying machine in that it makes a very high-pitched whine when it's actually working, and I'll show you that in a few moments. But it does a great job of loosening all of the previously encrusted grease, grime, dirt, and if you are re-waxing a chain, then wax that was on the chain previously. And once the chain comes out of there, you will see that you have a significantly cleaner product and one that is just about ready to go in terms of waxing. The second step that's going to need to be done is making sure that you've removed any of the soap used in the first step and to make sure that chain is really, really clean. And so that's done in a rinsing process, and the solution of choice is to use denatured alcohol. And now, obviously, perhaps not the most environmentally friendly kind of way of doing all of this, but when you consider oil and oil products, this is really not that much worse. Anyways, the chain gets washed off in alcohol in order to remove any bits and pieces, and once it's completely clean, you're ready to go with waxing it. Now, doing this with a cassette is more difficult, but still can be done. The best thing to do is really when you buy a new cassette, just before you put it on the wheel, make sure you clean it fully and then wax it and then get it on. Cassettes don't really need to be waxed repeatedly. You can, in fact, not choose to wax it at all because as long as the chain is waxed and the cassette is clean, you're okay. Now, the wax itself needs to be melted, hence its name molten. And so you could see I've got a small crock pot here that I bought for really not very much money. I think it cost me like 20 bucks on Amazon. And the wax is in there melting and has to get to a suitable temperature before it can be applied to the chain. All right, I'll take you through all of the steps right now, and we can take a look and see how involved the whole process is. So as I mentioned before, the first step in getting a chain waxed is to clean the chain and remove all of the old wax, or if you're using a newer chain, oil, grease, and grime. So you can see that's my older chain. It's got residue of wax on it from previous waxing. And I'm going to use this biodegradable degreaser called Simple Green, which you can buy on Amazon. It's really not very expensive at all, and it's quite useful for degreasing regular chains. The ultrasonic cleaner has to get up to 57 degrees Celsius, and that takes quite a long time, so I find helping it along by microwaving water does a good job. So we'll add some of this microwaved water, and I've added some of the soap already, and we'll see what that does for our temperature. So once you've got the fluid almost up to the prescribed temperature, you can degas. And what that is essentially turning on the machine for 6 minutes to allow for any small microbubbles within solution to come out of solution. This apparently makes the cleaning of the fluid better. And you're going to hear what I mean by the annoying high-pitched whine. I'll turn it on. And there it is. So that's going to go for 6 minutes. You don't have to be right at 57 at this point because the ultrasonic activity itself will contribute to further heating of the liquid. Okay, degassing is done. But unfortunately, and this is really the biggest pain in the butt of this whole process, now we have to do that 2 more times, but with the chain inside. So we take the lid off, take our dirty chain, drop that in there, drop it in with the 2 links as well, and we got to let that go for 6 minutes, and we're going to flip the chain over and run it for 6 minutes more. Now I think it's worth mentioning at this point that the ultrasonic cleaner is just one way of doing this. You don't actually need to do it with an ultrasonic cleaner, but I'm going to tell you after doing the alternative, which is to use various types of spirit baths using like paint stripper and alcohol, this is infinitely better. It's quicker, it's less messy, and the outlay for the ultrasonic cleaner isn't that much, and definitely worth it if you're going to get into waxing your chains at all. Yeah, the noise is a little bit annoying, but honestly, it's a small price to pay when you consider just the ease and efficiency with which the ultrasonic cleaner gets your chain degreased, and also the fact that it does a much better job than the serial baths that I did when I first started doing this. So the cleaning is done. I've removed the chain and placed it into this measuring cup. You could see it looks a lot nicer and cleaner. To do that, I use a nice heavy industrial sort of glove because the fluid is obviously quite hot. And you can see that instead of being that nice sort of cloudy grayish color, it's now turned a distinct black color, showing how much of the previous wax and some dirt has been removed. So now that we have it in this measuring cup, we're going to rinse off the soap. I'll just do that for a few minutes like this. The next step in the process is to do an alcohol bath to remove any of the small particles of wax that are still adherent to the chain, and also to remove some of the aqueous things like some of the soap that might be stuck in the chain, because you want this chain to be completely clean before you apply any wax. So you can see the alcohol is just covering the chain. I'm going to agitate this. And you can see that as I do so, there are tiny little particles in the alcohol solution, and those are particles of wax and soap and some of the other detritus that was loosened by the ultrasonic cleaner but not removed completely. And the idea is that we're going to have to redo this bath 2, maybe 3 times until that alcohol remains completely clear. Now, this is a training chain, so I don't care if the chain is completely pristine, but a chain used for racing that you want to have maximal wax adherency and minimal friction, you want that chain to be really, really clean, and therefore you work on getting the alcohol completely clear before you move on to the next step. Okay, I've taken the chain out of the alcohol bath, and now I need to wipe it with the cloth, a clean cloth, and make sure the cloth stays white like that. That suggests that there's no more residue on the chain. Pretty clean. And now we're ready to dry it before waxing it. So I just like to hang it over a chair and just leave it out in the sun here, And doesn't really need to stay long. Alcohol evaporates very quickly, so we'll just leave that for a couple of minutes and then get to the next step. Okay, we're ready to go. The wax has all melted, and you can see from this candy thermometer that the temperature is a little bit higher than I would like it to be. I don't know if you can quite see the mercury in there, but it's a little over 220. You want it to be around 195. Once it gets to around 195 or 200, I stir it up, and then I just turn the cooker off. Let the wax cool a little bit. Now, I've got the chain put on this handy chain tool, which is basically a reconfigured clothes hanger. And you can see I have the links on the end and then the chain itself. And getting the wax onto the chain is pretty simple. It's just a matter of immersing into the pot and really agitating it for a good 20 to 30 seconds. Now while you're doing this, what's happening is the wax is making its way into all the little joints and nooks and crannies of the chain, which hopefully you've cleaned completely from the previous steps, because that will allow for the wax to permeate and bond to the metal surfaces without any issues. Once that's done, it's just a matter of removing the chain, letting the wax drip down. And then we're going to move to pretty much the final process, which is letting it cool. Okay, the chain has been removed from the wax and is now ready to set. So what we do is we hang it and let the wax drip off. You can see that I have a previously done chain that's hanging off here. What I've done is I've banged a couple of nails into the shelf, and the chain hangs straight down, not touching the wood at all. And then at the bottom, any free wax drips onto the foil. And I can show you how I remove a freshly waxed chain from the hanger, or the little chain tool that I have. It's pretty simple, really. So hook the first loop onto the nail and then gently pull the hanger away. And the chain will simply hang in place. And there we go. So that chain is now hanging. It might be a little close to the shelf there, so I'm just going to fingertip just move that off and give it a little space. And then those two chains are ready to dry and set. I usually leave them overnight, although you probably don't have to leave them that long. A couple hours is probably good enough. So you've seen all of the steps that are involved, and it can be a bit of a lengthy process. You kind of have to set aside a couple of hours, really. I mean, there's time for the wax to melt in the crock pot, and then just the time for the cleaning and everything else. So I find having a good couple hours set aside will enable you to do a couple of chains. And I have different chains that I use. I have a training chain for my tri-bike. I have a race chain that I tend to use only for races, although this year, 2020, with the pandemic, I'm just alternating the two chains. And then I have a travel bike that I use for gravel, and if you've seen that video on here, you know that that bike goes with me wherever I go, and rather than having an oily chain in a travel case, I've used waxing, and it makes for a much cleaner and drier overall packing experience, if you will. But it's also great for gravel because, as I said earlier, wax doesn't attract all of the dirt and the dust, and so the chain will stay frictionless for longer than if it was an oil-based lubricant on there. All right, so the chains have set for the last 24 hours, and again, you don't have to let them set for quite that long. They can set for really only a couple hours or so, but I generally, because of timing, let them sit overnight. So you can see I've got two chains here that have been hanging, and when they come off, they're really quite rigid because the wax has solidified and made the chains pretty rigid. But you can break the links, and you can easily get the chain to fold and all that. But before you put the chain on the bike, what you need to do is actually get the wax to break in each of the links. And this is the part of the process that kind of sucks because it's a little tough on the fingers. So you got to go through every link of the chain and break the wax just to mobilize those links. And you do that for the chain before you mount it onto the bike. So I've got the chain now. I've broken the wax from all the links, and I've put the chain back onto the bike. I've got it over the front ring, and then I've threaded it over the cassette and through the cogs in the back. I use quick link systems for my chains because I'm constantly undoing them and then doing them back up, either for waxing the chains or in the case of my travel bike for traveling. So having a quick link system makes it really easy to use. A Connex system is what I use on my tri-bike, but there are various other quick linking systems available, and I just suggest you explore the ones that are best suited for you if this is the route that you choose to take. Now, when a newly waxed chain is placed on the bike, it's pretty stiff, at least at first, and so it's not uncommon for the drive chain to be pretty noisy and not shift as well as you would expect it to once it's warmed up. And so usually I like to ride the bike for probably 20 to 30 minutes just to allow the chain to loosen up and for the wax to warm up. In warmer weather, this can take only about 15 minutes or so. And then once that happens, the chain will be perfectly lubed and perfectly quiet, and shifting is a dream. So if you're keeping score and wondering how much it costs, at least in an initial outlay of money for getting started on waxing your chain, these are all the tools that I have acquired. Aside from the molten wax, which is $20 a bag and lasts a really long time. I mean, I wax my chains pretty regularly, but even then, a bag lasts, gosh, a couple of years at least. Anyways, so we've got the slow cooker to melt the wax, the ultrasonic cleaner, and the simple green for cleaning the chain. And again, you don't have to do it that way. You can do repeated baths in mineral spirits, but I definitely encourage, if you're doing this or if you're thinking about doing this, get the ultrasonic cleaner. It's cleaner and it saves so much time in the long run. You've got the denatured alcohol, mason jar, and a funnel for the alcohol baths, a good pair of industrial strength cleaning gloves, and a candy thermometer to measure the temperature of the wax to make sure that it's at the right temperature for coating the chains. I've tallied everything up on the screen here so you can see what the initial outlay cost is, and honestly, if it's something you're considering, I think you'll probably agree it's not huge, and really the most cost is the time investment just to do the chains periodically. So after watching all of this, you may be finding yourself wondering, is this really worth the effort? I mean, it's a certain amount of investment, both economically and certainly in terms of time and commitment in order to, take up waxing your chains. And what do I really get out of this? Well, at the end of the day, it's a bit of a personal preference. In studies that have been done looking at this, chain wax has been found to offer a significant advantage over the worst types of lubes. Now, again, not all lubes are, created equal. Good lubes can save you up to 3 watts over the worst types of lubes, and wax has been found to save as much as 6 watts over really poor types of chain lubes or, unlubed chains. So that's a pretty significant advantage just from reducing the amount of friction in your drivetrain. Personally, as I said earlier in this video, waxing for me is something that is a matter both of convenience and also of potential benefit in terms of a marginal gain. For my travel bike, it just makes a lot of sense to be able to remove a chain and then put it back on if it's waxed, and I don't have to deal with oil and lube and the mess that's involved every time I pack and unpack the bike. For my tri-bike, the fact that wax only has to be applied every 350 miles, I don't have to worry about a drivetrain that's gathering dirt. That's, definitely for someone like me who's very time pressed in terms of getting my training in. If I don't have to be dealing with maintenance of the chain on a regular basis, I don't mind putting in and compressing it into a 1 or 2 hour time frame every few months and waxing the chain, especially if that gives me a benefit in terms of actual race performance. Now, I keep 2 chains. I keep one on my bike for training and I put one on there just for racing. So I will, commit a different amount of time for each of those in terms of the cleaning process prior to doing the waxing. The investment is, I think, kind of makes itself back when you consider that waxing can prolong the life of the chain as well, because the chain's not getting dirty, because you're not putting it through a lot of increased friction and the stresses on the materials that you get when there is a dirt in those cogs and in those little joints, then the chain can actually have a longer life. And so over the course of several years, you can see how, spending less money on chains can actually recoup your initial investment on things like the ultrasonic cleaner. But again, that's kind of not really going to matter when you're spending the money at the initial outlay. So this again becomes very much a personal preference. If you're really geeky about your equipment, you spend a lot of time cleaning it like I do, and you really want to, get every little watt advantage that you can because you need to maximize every potential benefit, then waxing's a pretty good option to consider. And yes, the investment is not insignificant in terms of time, but for me, anyways, I found it to be something I don't mind doing, and I consider it to be worth it because of the advantages it confers. Do you have a question for me for my podcast or for something that you'd like me to consider doing a brief video on? Well, send it to me at tri_doc at icloud.com, and I'd be happy to consider it, and possibly you'll see your answer or hear it on the podcast coming up soon. For now, there are links both here and here that you can see other videos that I've posted in the past, and continue staying safe during this COVID pandemic. And remember, train hard, train healthy.